Good. I'm going to record because there's a couple of people from class today who wanted me to do that.
Okay, well, it's summer vacation. That's nice.
Yeah, I got to tell you, yeah, I was surprised to not see more. I just hopped on 2 minutes ago. It's usually more of a crowd, but I know Bernice can't make it. And I know Sue Shapiro can't make it.
You know,
So-
I have a hard time getting through the week without this. You know that.
Well, wait, wasn't it your kid's birthday yesterday, 2 days ago?
Todd was 55 yesterday.
Oh my gosh.
Yep, my little boy. You're right in between them. You know that. Jen will be 53 on the 3rd of July.
Okay.
And you're right in the middle. Aren't you 54?
I am 54. Yeah.
I know you are. I keep track of you.
That's scary. You know too much.
You mean, does that mean I'm old enough to be your grandfather?
No.
No.
No, for sure not. For sure not. So good to see everybody. I know we're waiting for a couple more people, but I'm excited to start our new course. And Diane, good to see you. I know exactly where you are because I know that neon sign at the Van Aken district. Diane is going to be covering next week. So thanks for joining us. And Diane, I'll send you the materials for next week as well. But you just
I'll have to leave early.
I'm recording.
I'm glad you're recording it because I have to go read to the little kids in a few minutes.
Wonderful. That's great. Okay. Hi, Janice. Good to see you. All right. Let's see. We are getting closer there. I wanted to open up with a little sharing. Thought it might be helpful. And to start our new course. So I will start with that. And I'm going to ask you if you recognize some of these, going to ask you if you recognize some of these particular melodies. So here we go. Sound familiar? right, that's one. What about this one? See if you get it. Anybody recognize that? Sometimes we'll sing it during High Holy Days. All right. Let's see. Somebody put something in the chat. Sounds like a Russian choir in the background a little bit, right? So the first one was Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai. Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai. Often sung at Jewish weddings. And then Esai Nai, I know that Cantor Lappin has done that. I know that Cantor Sager has also sung it. So those are all melodies from none other than Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach. Shake your head if you've heard of Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach. Yeah, some of you have. All right, he is probably one of the most prolific Jewish songwriters of our, our time. He died a number of years back, but he was prolific. And he was also a mentor and an inspiration and a Rebbe to many people. He would tell stories as he sang a song, like before he sang a song, and then in the middle of the song, he would tell another story, and it was very compelling. It was discovered a few years back that Rabbi Carlebach had engaged in many indiscretions. And so it really raised the question about his music. So I wanted to just share with you like an article. This article, I'm just going to do a piece of it, but this article from Lilith magazine. And the title is Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach's Shadow Side. Could certainly send you the article in full later. But it talks about how incredibly powerful his music and his reputation was. He died at age 69. And the magazine interviewed a number of people who had contact with him, particularly women. And he had this amazing effect, not only musically, but also on promoting women. He ordained women. He took down a mechitza between women and men. At times, the barrier that separates women and men in prayer. And it says, while Rabbi Carlebach was never formally connected with the Jewish renewal movement, which encouraged spiritual and mystical expressions of Judaism, his teachings and music have had a deep impact on many renewal congregations and more. Among the many people Lilith spoke with, nearly all had heard stories of Rabbi Carlebach's sexual indiscretions during his more than 4-decade rabbinic career. Spiritual leaders, psychotherapists, and others report numerous incidents from playful propositions to actual sexual contact. Most of the allegations, including middle of the night, sexually charged phone calls and unwanted attention or propositions. Others which have been slower to emerge, relate to sexual molestation. So we have an individual who leaves a great legacy of music to our people, and yet also has this reputation. His daughter, Neshama Karlbach, is actually a singer in her own right, and she wrote a letter about all of these accusations, which was incredibly powerful, which I can certainly share with you as well. The reason why I bring this to you is because our course that we're starting this week is called Money and Power, and it really speaks to particularly this session. We'll talk a lot about power and reputation, and if someone's Torah, figuratively and literally, can survive a reputation that may not honor the Torah that has been taught. And so I wanted to start there, and perhaps you could even think about individuals in your lives who, had a reputation, to put forth a certain perspective that was honored and respected, and then you also learned, or you knew, and maybe it was never exposed, that there was another side. There was another side to them. So with that, I'd like to start looking at our text and dive right in. But if you have anybody has any particular reactions to all of that, feel free to place it in the chat. I'd like to see that ongoing, and also as we're going along today, just feel free to do that. But let's start. Let's start with our first text. By the way, I will say, when I introduced this topic of money and power, people had a very visceral reaction to, oh, thank you, Vera, we'll do the blessing. People had a very visceral reaction to these words and associating with Judaism or Jews, money and power. So I'm also, it was funny, it was almost as if people were like, well, but we don't talk about that. Jews shouldn't talk about that. Other people talk about Jews in really bad ways about that. So we're not going to acknowledge that. So that was interesting too. So why don't we do the bracha? Thank you, Vera. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, so I want to keep that in mind as we're thinking about power and money and what rises up for you as you think about that, and whether or not that's kind of hits a button for you. Because when non-Jews talk about Jewish power, Jewish money, it's a trigger. And so, but what's beautiful is, in a Jewish context, we could talk about that quite hopefully transparently, and be honest about those feelings that we might have. So with that, let's start with our first text. I'm excited. All right, here we go. So here's the introduction. All the time we are confronted by the reality that sometimes the people we hold up as great leaders, people who are brilliant artists, effective politicians, and generous philanthropists who have given much to society and have much more to offer, can also be deeply flawed individuals. What do we do when we find out that one of these people has crossed an ethical red line? What happens to their leadership, and how do we respond? In this session, we're going to look at two different stories from the Talmud that examine the question, can you remember the Torah and forget the deeds? Or, in other words, can you separate an artist from his art? When we find out about a person's moral wrongdoing, can we continue to benefit from this person's Torah? And here I mean Torah in the most expansive sense of the word. Or do we lose the Torah along with the leader? What criteria do we use to access this question? And is the answer to this question different depending on the field of the leader's expertise? Do we answer differently for artists and scientists than we do for rabbis and teachers? What do you think? Sometimes it feels like we can reject those whose work we don't necessarily love or appreciate. It's harder to reject artists and scholars who we respect and whose words we might use, whose words give us inspiration, right? It's very hard to ignore the music of Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach because it permeates so much of Jewish music and temple life. So these are, when the rubber hits the road, it becomes harder for us to separate. There's many people in society who I'm sure you're thinking about right now. So who have created brilliant art and who you may stay away from right now because it's offensive to you, what they've done or what they stand for. Can we watch a sports star who, who practices domestic violence off the field? Can we enjoy movies from a director who, is known to have molested his children? Right. Bill, you're throwing out that name, Woody Allen, right? Or, I mean, there are probably other names that you're thinking of right now, and you could certainly, in this chat, you could put those in there as well. And I know sometimes there's a feeling of not wanting to spread those rumors and spread those feelings. But if it feels comfortable for you to do so, please do. So I wanted to start with this first text. Does a teacher need to be an angel? So let's look at this text, and the questions come up. How do the rabbis handle this case of a corrupt leader? What are the competing values they juggle? Okay, here we go. There was a certain there was a certain Torah scholar who gained a bad reputation due to rumors about his conduct. Rav Yehuda said, what should be done? To excommunicate him is not an option. The sages need him, as he is a great Torah authority. Not to excommunicate him is also not an option. And then the name of heaven would be desecrated. So we're seeing this already. The rabbis are struggling with individuals who have a bad reputation, but whose Torah is valuable. So what do we do? If we excommunicate him, we leave the Torah. But if we have him survive that reputation, then we're also dealing with somebody who we know is sullied in some way. Rav Yehuda said to Rabbi Bar Hana, have you heard anything with regard to this issue? He said to him, Rabbi Yochanan said as follows, what is the meaning of that which is written? For the priest's lips should keep knowledge, and they should seek Torah at his mouth. For he is a messenger, a malach of the Lord of hosts. This verse teaches, if the Torah is similar to an angel of the Lord, then seek Torah from his mouth. But if he is not pure and upright, then do not seek Torah from his mouth. Even if he is knowledgeable about Torah, do not learn from him. Based on this statement, Rav Yehuda ostracized that Torah scholar. A wasp came and stung the ostracized scholar on his amah, and he died. His amah is an Aramaic word for his forearm. So we have Rav Avi Strasberg, who spoke, when we begin the story, it's unclear exactly what the young scholar has done wrong, and if he's even done anything wrong at all. What we know is that many rumors are circulating about his bad behavior. By the end of the story, we are told that after spending a lifetime in excommunication, many years in which he would be unable to take part in prayer life, and no one could learn from his teachings, that he was eventually stung on his arm and died. Later rabbinic commentators understood this to mean that he was stung on his penis, taking this as proof that the rumors about him were right after all, and that the nature of his death reveals the nature of his sin, that is, sexually inappropriate behavior. So we're already seeing some questions about ethical behavior and how we manage it, and how the rabbis manage it. So I was going to ask you, how do you deal with this statement? If the teacher is similar to an angel of the Lord, then seek Torah from his mouth. But if he is not pure and upright, then do not seek Torah from his mouth. How do we understand that? Like, how can we determine whether somebody is pure or upright? What are the metrics? Go ahead, Archie.
So what that said was, I was thinking something like that. Speaking Torah from your mouth. So the words could remain to be studied.
Mm-hmm.
But the rabbi could be removed from the place of worship to speak them.
Yes.
It would be okay, because maybe you look back at the words and you see that between the lines, the rabbi was saying something that was inappropriate at the time, and it should be studied, but not to allow him to glorify them out from his mouth.
Yeah. So you can keep the words.
You could keep the words and study the words, to learn from the words, but not to allow the rabbi to present them and
Gotcha.
glorify the rabbi.
Right. I mean, one could argue that we're all vessels of God, right? And that the words, the actions that come through us, sometimes are not of us completely, right? That they're kind of inspired. And certainly when we think about the rabbis, that there was divine inspiration that was coming from them, that was kind of being drawn by holiness. And can we separate an individual from his good deeds, the good words? Can we still benefit from them? Diane writes, this example brushes up against Lashon Hara, since there isn't proof of his indiscretion, only rumors. Right. So there's no right. We really just, there's hearsay, and someone should be given a fair shake. A third path is worth considering: tochacha, rebuke, such that the person could come clean and redirect their actions. Right? Can we give them an opportunity to either speak to the accusations and dispel them if they wish, or to own them, and to make tshuva, to try to redeem themselves, to apologize for what they've done? Would that make their words more palatable if someone owned an indiscretion, or do we still toss them out? Go ahead, Roland.
Yeah, well, one of the greatest opera conductors of our time, James Levine, was a known pedophile for many years. Does that make his music, then he got banned and lawsuit and all that, but does that make his music bad and unlistenable for the thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that listen to his productions live and on media? So he had a good side and a bad side. And how do you evaluate that in listening to music?
Absolutely. And staying with the opera theme, Placido Domingo has also been accused of indiscretions, and then you think about in further down back is Franz Wagner, who was a known anti-Semite. So yeah, it's we've got a lot of beautiful music that was created by people who have their own reputations. Go ahead, Donna.
That's what the movie Tar is about, for those who've seen that. But what I was thinking about was, to me, it's different. I can go to an art gallery and look at a painting from somebody who has had major indiscretions. I can listen to music that from someone who has had major indiscretions. But we're talking about Torah, which is how to live your life and morality. And to me, there has to be a distinction drawn. That's much harder for me to excuse, and certainly I'm not sure I want to hear from someone who's had major indiscretions in that way versus looking at a piece of art or hearing a score.
Yeah, the lines get very blurry, right, Donna? You're thinking about an individual, you're hearing their Torah, or you're hearing somebody share their Torah, but you know that individual, you know what they've done. Can we get that image out of one's mind, or what they've done out of one's mind? Is it tainting the teachings on their own, which on their own could be very valuable, but connected to an individual? Can we ever separate? And then it also begs the question, Donna, like, should we hold our religious leaders to a higher standard than we hold ourselves? That could be a question, a rational question that we could all answer one way, but in our hearts, we may believe it differently anyway, because I do think people are looking for role models, and which is good. We all should have people that we strive to be like, and then when they break that trust, it's hard to repair. Go ahead, Anita.
Sorry, I agree wholeheartedly with Donna. To me, music, art, business is totally different than ethics and role models. We've recently have had at another temple, and frankly, from what I understand, our own indiscretions that cause people great concern. But to me, art, music is very different. When in my younger years, you look for these people to always be role models. In my younger years, when I was still insecure, a Jewish billionaire at a meeting sauntered up to me and said, "Come on over here, kid. I want to teach you a lesson." And he said, "Power is never given. It's always taken." And it was absolutely repulsive for me to hear this, because that's not how I looked at this man, frankly. But then many years later, I had a position of power, and I conducted an experiment because it's stuck in my mind. And I started giving away power. And it was very interesting. The more you gave away, the more powerful I saw myself becoming, because I think people were unnerved by, here, do this, take this, run with it.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think religious leaders are much different.
Yeah, thank you. No, I got it. Yeah, it's empower and community organizing. We talk a lot about power, and a lot of people see power as a bad word, as conflict. They kind of repel, but power, if used properly, can be very, very powerful to define the word itself. Marilyn writes, "I keep thinking about what we have seen in the Reform movement with quite a few rabbis, inappropriate behavior coloring all of the good they might have previously done." Absolutely, and that's become much more apparent. We brought daylight to a lot of these behaviors, which I believe is a good thing. Lorinda and John, you had your hand up, and then we're going to get to the next text.
I had heard somewhere along the way that "Here Comes the Bride," which was written by Wagner, is not used at Jewish weddings because of his anti-Semitism.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, I've officiated at many Jewish weddings, and I don't know if I've ever heard "Here Comes the Bride." I think in part it's due to Wagner's anti-Semitism, but I think it's just also just not culturally not seen as a Jewish thing. Doesn't mean that if you had it played at your wedding or your loved one's weddings, it's a bad thing. It's just, it means that it's just, in my time, I have not seen that. But yes, when I speak with couples and they ask me about music for the processional, I do share with them that history. Let's go to the next text. Thank you for all your comments. Really, it's really helpful to hear where you're at. Let's go to the next text, which is source 2. The daughter of Acher, and Acher was a character from the Talmud who's very controversial, and had a bad reputation himself, came before Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi and said to him, Rabbi, provide me with sustenance. Now remember, this is the daughter of Acher. He said to her, whose daughter are you? She said to him, I am the daughter of Acher. He said to her, is there still of his seed remaining in the world? But isn't it stated, he shall have neither son nor grandson among his people or any remaining in his dwellings? She said to him, remember his Torah and do not remember his deeds. Immediately fire descended and licked the bench of the rabbi where he was sitting. Rabbi wept and said, if God sends fire to protect the honor of those who treat the Torah with contempt, like Acher, in such a manner, how much more so would God do for those who treat it with honor? All right, so what are we seeing there? What are we seeing as God's reaction? Remember, it's really interesting how God sometimes responds. It's like a fire that comes and licks the bench, but it's a fire of approval, right? Or it's a fire, could be a fire of rebuke, right? Like, don't think, you shouldn't reject this man, And then we have Rabbi who sort of understands what's going on, and he said, wow, even though you are the daughter of Acher, and there's a part of me that wants to reject everything about you because you are connected to this man, I can't, because his Torah might be still valuable. Diane writes, I'm thinking about what Donna and Anita are saying and coming up with the word hypocrisy. Torah is ethical teaching, so having a Torah teacher behave unethically is particularly upsetting. Having an opera singer or artist be indiscreet seems less gut-wrenching. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, although, opera and music is very profound, and it comes from a place, of human connection. And that's, rabbis try to teach human connection. We just do it in different ways. So yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting conversation. Rav Strasberg kind of comments and explains this teaching. She says, when Acher's daughter, here, I'm going to just share it with you, but I have to share the screen first. She writes, when Acher's daughter comes before Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, needing help to survive, he is quick to dismiss her and is surprised to even encounter after her father's excommunication. In response to Rabbi's dismissive response, she argues, remember his Torah and do not remember his deeds. Fire descends and touches the very bench where Rabbi is sitting and begins to cry, saying, if God protects the honor of those who treat Torah with contempt in such a manner, how much more so would God do for those who treat it with honor? So what does it mean to, right? She asks, remember his Torah and not remember his deeds. How can we do that? Is it possible? And is it possible to sort of in your mind cognitively to think that, but in your heart, but your heart can't get there? Can you do it? I mean, we talk a lot about today, particularly in our modern culture, the conversations swirl around cancel culture, and like seeing somebody as dead to you. I can't even abide. So these are individuals who are walking the earth who have been completely discredited. So it's an interesting, right? It's one thing if they have passed, but it's another thing if they're still alive. And how do we deal with that? How do we understand their realities, their teachings, and can we learn anything from them? Do you think he was dismissive because she was a woman? Thankfully, times change, perhaps not enough, but they changed. Perhaps, Anita, you mean Acher's daughter? Yeah, it could have been. It could have been for sure, because she's just looking for sustenance. It's interesting, right? If you look at what she's asking for, let's not get lost too much in it to forget what she is asking for sustenance. She's asking for tzedakah. She's asking for help. And suddenly he is discrediting her. He's not even considering her ask because she's attached to somebody else who's not her. And so at the end, he cries. And it's a very emotional scene. It says, Bacha va'amar Rabbi, Uma lemitnagin ba kach. He says, Rabbi wept and said, if God sends fire to protect the honor of those who treat the Torah with contempt, how much more so would God do so for those who treat it with honor? He's like crying, perhaps, to say, like, I didn't even hear what his daughter had to ask me. What she represented was so abhorrent to me because of who her father was. I couldn't even hear her ask what she was looking for. So how do we navigate that? You know, that's part of the challenge with people's legacies. How do we navigate that? How do we, someone like Shlomo Carlebach, whose daughter is providing music in the world, think about, she's walking around the world carrying that, her father's reputation with her. Go ahead, Roland.
Yeah, well, that's how you get lifelong feuds and wars, because you blame something on some individual that had nothing to do with what the problem was, and you perpetuate the problem. I mean, this young lady, we assume, you know, she was okay. She didn't do anything, but the rabbi, from his lofty position, says, "You're no good because your father was no good. So get the hell out of here and starve." Now, is that a position that one would like to support? I mean, that's, you would think, you would hope that there would be some mercy on the part of this lofty rabbi, who's never done anything wrong in his life that we know of, blaming the daughter who might never have done anything bad. And then you got this whirlpool going around and around and around, and you hate generates hate.
Absolutely. We kind of, you get attached, individuals, sometimes institutions get attached to the behavior, right? And you think about that even though an individual may have been jettisoned from an institution who did bad stuff, that the institution still carries that weight, somehow needing to prove themselves, needing to, start from scratch. Guilt by association. Absolutely, Vera, right? And we do that with a lot of people. We do that with people do that with Jews. We talk about money and power, right? We're suddenly, if Madoff, behaves in a certain way, or if a sports agent behaves in a certain way, then maybe Jews are just greedy, and power hungry. So go ahead, Nancy.
Well, somewhere in the Torah, and I think it's twice, there's statements about the sins of the father going from generation to generation. So this rabbi may have hearkened to those passages and says the sins of the father, hair, can be ascribed to the daughter, and from generations, I forget how many generations is it, 10, 12 generations going
Right.
forward. So there's no clear-cut answer, although justice and mercy don't seem to be part of this conversation. And
Right.
should we also look to, I mean, Moses was not perfect and sinned against God, and yet he is still considered Moshe Rabbeinu, but he's not our God. So where does that fit in, that there's an exemplar within the Torah itself of someone who was considered very imperfect and sinned so much he couldn't get to the promised land? So I think the whole thing, all these passages there's no clear-cut answer. And so you sort of have to wing it. Try to make peace with yourself, what makes sense to you, given
Right.
all this input, because there isn't although there could have been a clear-cut answer, they could have said something really harsh and say,
Yeah.
this is how you deal with them. Instead, they come up with more and more discussion about, well, maybe this and maybe that.
Yeah.
So
It's such a-
you're sort of left floating with no answer.
You're left, yes, for sure. And some people will ask, Rabbi, what does Judaism say about this or that? And the easiest answer is it depends. But you talk about Moses, Nancy, glorified because of his sort of misdeeds in the Torah. But compared to King David, Moses was a complete angel. I mean, David, takes another man's wife. The man who is her husband is fighting for David. He's like on the front lines fighting for the kingdom. David puts him on the frontest of lines to make sure he dies so he can have that guy's wife. So, now King David, he was punished for that in the hardest way. He lost a child. But we sing David Melech Yisrael, David, the king of Israel, Chai Chai V'Kayam, he may live and exist. I mean, it's as if none of that happened. So absolutely, Nancy, we don't see the consistency of rebuking and just leaving them off of the, now leaving them on the cutting room floor. Diane writes, some argue that a God that destroys entire nations or who commands the Israelites to destroy a nation is not a God they can believe in or look up to. Right. Yeah. Right. So it's like, right. The Holy One, blessed be God, is also someone, an individual. We don't always know the sort of motivations for the actions. And then sometimes when we see those actions happen in the Torah, they don't seem consistent with the values that we believe are very Jewish. I think that's where you're going, Diana, maybe a little bit, is just, the Torah that is, traditionally comes from God on Mount Sinai, that Torah is delivered, and some of that Torah is hard for us to hear. Anita writes, when I first learned about David, I wondered why any Jew would name their son David. Yeah, absolutely. It's a very popular name. You know what David means? Beloved. So it's absolutely, and then people struggle with that because they know what the role character might have represented, and then should we name our child after this individual? Bill, if we're created in God's image, then there is both good and evil in all of us. Yeah, right. That might be an argument, Bill, that of having sort of more sort of compassion. Right. I could read that, Bill, right? By having more compassion, that if somebody behaves untowardly, that maybe it's like, well, it's because we're all flawed. If God was flawed, then we're flawed. So maybe that the Torah that they taught before they erred is still salvageable. It's very tricky. Let's go to the next text. Okay. Rabbi Meir. Okay, so here's the next part is one of the fascinating aspects of Elisha ben Abuya was how his friend and student Rabbi Meir continued to learn from him. Okay, Acher was a nickname for Elisha ben Abuya. And by the way, Elisha ben Abuya, who is Acher, was his reputation was disputed because of his heresy. So he continued to learn from him even after his heresy. The text, remember, this is Acher is the father of the daughter who came to see Rabbi Yochanan. So the text of the Talmud continues questioning how he could do this. And Rabbi Meir, how could he learn Torah from the mouth of Acher, a heretic? But didn't Rabbi Bar Hana say that Rabbi Yochanan said, what is the meaning of that which is written? For the priest's lips should keep knowledge, and they should seek Torah from his mouth, for he is an angel of the Lord of hosts. For the priest's lips should keep knowledge, and they should seek Torah from his mouth, for he is an angel of the Lord of hosts. If the rabbi is similar to an angel of the Lord of hosts, they should seek Torah from his mouth. But if not, they should not seek Torah from his mouth. Logical. Okay. So how do we know if someone is similar to an angel of the Lord of hosts, of course, is a big question. Reish Lakish said, Rabbi Meir found a verse and interpreted it, incline your ear and hear the words of the wise and apply your heart to knowledge, to my knowledge, to my knowledge. It does not state to their knowledge, but to my knowledge. I want you to think about that again. Rabbi Meir found a verse interpreted from Proverbs. Incline your ear and hear the words of the wise and apply your heart to God's knowledge. It does not state to their knowledge of the wise people's knowledge, but my knowledge. It's as if God is taking ownership over the words, the wise words that God's children share. The verses contradict each other. This is not difficult. This case is referring to a gadol, someone who's great, whereas that case is referring to a katan, someone who's not so great. In the little piece here of gadol on the side, the opposites gadol and katan, literally big and small, could refer to several different contrasts. Most notably here, big equals adult, small equals minor. Big equals great in wisdom, small lacking in wisdom. Okay. There's a lot in there. It's a really interesting text. So, the part that, well, first of all, there's a couple of things to talk about. That one thing is God is taking ownership over that knowledge. So if a rabbi shares something that is wise, and that rabbi then errs, maybe in a really bad way, can we say that those wise words actually came from God? And then, in effect, we're actually removing the words from the person who delivered them. That if God breathes life into us, does that mean that also God breathes wisdom into us? And does that mean that the good things we do are not completely, we don't completely own them? That we are just a vessel for those things? And therefore, any great wisdom that is shared, any great music that is shared, any great art that is shared is actually a product of something greater than the individual who composed, delivered, created them. Could that be? God says, it's just a great line, right? Or Rabbi Meir says, it does not state to their knowledge, but to my knowledge. God, capital M-Y, my knowledge. God says, oh, Annie Hall, that's beautiful art. That's beautiful art. I have breathed that capability of art into Woody Allen. And beautiful music from Wagner, that comes from me. And that music from Shlomo Carlebach, he may have been a philanderer and a harasser. But come on, the music lives on. And the rabbi who did really horrible things, well, those words still live. They come from a tradition. That rabbi's a product of generations who came before him. Individual results may vary. I feel like I've heard you say that before. You want to unpack that a little bit more?
Other than basically you would have to go through, like, instead of having a one size fit all, I'm really hitting all the catch lines today. Instead of just a one rule for everything, it seems like, you know, more or less the society or congregation or what have you kind of goes through an individual's background and then kind of does the scale of, you know, the good, the pros and the cons, and then just kind of goes from there whether or not to
Yes.
accept them or to reject them.
Yeah. I had a feeling that's what you meant, but it's really right. It is interesting, and it's not consistent for everybody, right? I think going back to what Nancy says, we can't like just make a rule and say, like, I can't say, hey, everybody, it's okay. You can accept the Torah from that rabbi whose actions were abhorrent to you. I say it's okay. You know what I mean? Like, that's not, I can't layer that on. That's your you know, independent process. But look at, and now to Vera's point, look at this piece here. This is not difficult, right? They're trying to figure out, the rabbis are struggling, and they said about Acher, and they said this case refers to a gadol, whereas that case refers to a katan. What does that mean? Maybe, right? Now they're kind of picking and choosing. The words that we're going to hold on to are from somebody who is a really great individual or might have had great wisdom. The words we're not going to hold on to, maybe not so much. Now, who decides, right? Who decides who's a gadol, who's great, and who's a katan? That's the question. I want to, and we have a little more time left, so I want to go move from the text itself that we're looking at to back to where we started from, which is Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach. Remember, his music, very powerful. I lift up my eyes, I look to the mountains. Where will my help come? My help comes from God. And then Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai. Timeless Jewish music. Some of you may know some of his stuff more than others, but definitely, like, these are melodies that are played and have been played throughout Jewish congregations. There was one congregation that, when these allegations came out about Rabbi Carlebach, which were really, I mean, it took over the Jewish media for a while about his actions, because he was a man who was truly beloved. In college, when I was at Boston University, I was invited to someone's home where he was playing guitar and singing. And so I was a student at that time. And I remember sitting at the feet of Rabbi Carlebach and hearing his music and feeling so taken by it. And then when he left, it was like a suburb of Boston. When he left the home, he would do this, by the way, go to people's homes, you know, like, probably these were givers, you know, to him and to, you know, maintain his rabbinate. And he would go and he would play, and you would be swept up in it. And I remember saying goodbye to him, and he didn't even know me, and he held me to his beard, and he smelled so good. And his beard felt so good. It was like, you know, you could tell how people were really drawn to him. He was, you know, and I was like thinking about becoming a rabbi and all of this. So I was definitely taken by him. And I didn't even know all of his music at the time. But Central Synagogue, which is which is one of the more well-known synagogues in the country, it's one Central Synagogue of the city of New York, had struggled with this question about Rabbi Karl Bach. So I wanted to, is actually the senior rabbi wrote a piece about this particular struggle. And I wanted to share it with you. Some of you may be familiar with it. And she writes, Rabbi Angela Warnick Buchdahl, our nation's reckoning with sexual assault has unfolded with powerful parallels in our Torah's narrative. You know, she kind of goes on. We don't have time for me to read the whole article. For many generations of women who experienced sexual violence and degradation, there was no salvation. Talks about the Me Too era. I would like to think that the days of ignoring sexual assault are over, but the only way to make sure this moment becomes a true societal transformation is for each of us to take responsibility. So she writes, the average Jew in the pews probably cannot identify the composers of most of our prayers' melodies, but there's probably no songwriter more ubiquitous in Jewish sacred music than Rabbi Shlomo Karl Bach. He wrote literally hundreds of liturgical melodies, composed nigunim that brings Jews to ecstatic fervor, and composed classics such as Am Yisrael Chai, and of course, Return Again, Return Again, Return to the land of your soul. Return to who you are, return to what you are, return to where you are over and over. We sing that during the High Holy Days. They're beloved across the Jewish world. Karl Bach was a charismatic spiritual leader who championed women in Orthodox Jewish leadership, built bridges across denominations, and wrote the soundtrack of the Jewish world of the last century. He has also been accused of sexually molesting dozens of women for decades, some as young as 12 years old. I had heard whispers about Karl Bach's behavior since my first involvement in Jewish music. And 20 years ago, a few years after his death, Lilith magazine published a well-sourced report documenting accounts of his sexual abuse, including testimonials from numerous women. I read this account. I was horrified, but I did nothing. I kept singing his music. I justified it in the familiar ways, telling myself that great art often comes from very complicated, flawed people, and that I could separate the art from the artist. Rabbi Karl Bach, whom I saw perform when I was a college student, would always correct the audience if they sang incorrectly, even one note of his melodies. He intoned, if it were my melody, I wouldn't mind, but that is not how I received it from God. Just what we were talking about, folks, right? Who owns the music? Who owns the words? You may hear these words as a statement of an enlightened prophet or as an egotistical false messiah, but I agreed with his fundamental point that he was merely the messenger. Karl Bach had a divine gift that flowed through him. So I continued singing his songs for decades, even as I knew his past, because his music was always bigger than him. But this Me Too moment shook me from my certainty. I read an article from a woman whose mother described being molested by Karl Bach as a young woman. She shared what it felt like for her to walk into any synagogue, any Jewish camp, and to always hear the music of the man who victimized her. Karl Bach's misconduct was widely known, and through indifference, the Jewish community's message was, it's not that we don't believe you, it's that we don't care. This inaction fundamentally undermined the victim's trust in Jewish institutions. This woman and so many others stepped forward to put blood on their doorposts, and we cannot pass over them again. I too am responsible, and yet I still believe that art and the artist can be separated, and that we would impoverish our culture if we banned or silenced all of the great art that came from the most deeply flawed people. So what to do? I brought this question to my synagogue's clergy team and board of trustees. This discussion was not just about Karl Bach, but about the larger principle. We studied this issue with the benefit and wisdom of Jewish and secular texts. I had discussions with Neshama Karl Bach, Shlomo Karl Bach's daughter, whose life work has been intimately connected with her father's legacy. While she is obviously not in a position to sanction or rebuff any synagogue's decision regarding her father's music, she has been supportive of the frank conversation, expressed her personal reckoning in a brave essay, adding her voice to this moment of communal transformation. In the end, we felt that our responsibility in this moment was education, not erasure. We decided to take a one-year moratorium on singing any Karl Bach melodies at Central Synagogue, and that we would speak and teach about why we were doing so. and trained to respond differently to sexual assault in the future. 1 year is not a magic number, but it marks a traditional mourning period. 1 year would take us through the entire cycle of holidays and seasons. We hope this communicates to all those who have come forward to describe being victimized by Carl Bach that we hear you, we are not indifferent. In this coming year, we will see what this music, what new music emerges in the vacuum that is created without Carl Bach's music. And when we bring his melodies back to Central, it will be different because our sound will have changed. Our Torah narrative teaches that God does not redeem us until we step forward and mark ourselves as oppressed. I marvel at the bravery of those Israelites who put blood on their doorposts so that we all might find freedom. We each have a role to play, a new song to sing that can help us bring us all closer to that liberation. That's right, Marilyn. Rabbi Buckdahl is also a cantor. She is a cantor. Reactions, Donna.
Brava. So I was really struggling with this whole conversation, I have to say, as a woman, because I feel like what I want to hear what the Torah says about a lot of things. I was really struggling with this ambivalence, mealy-mouthed stuff. Because it comes, what it doesn't recognize is that all of these people are men and they are in tremendous positions of power. And it hasn't been until recently that that has even been recognized. You know, it's part of my training as a psychotherapist. I have tremendous power over people, and it is part of my ethics that I don't abuse that. And I feel like that is because of the times it was in. I understand that. That is not part of the Torah or the Talmud. And to sort of, I just don't buy the ambivalence for that reason. And, you know, when we talk, yes, there's different levels. It's one thing if someone has an affair, if it's one thing. But when we're talking about abusing that power within that institution, there's no ambivalence for me.
Sure. Yep, I got you. Yeah, and I think recognizing that context, that it's a world of men, and a world of men defending men, and yeah, you know, maybe we can rationalize it and say that their words you're different than the person, but is that just defending more men and defending the behavior? Yeah, go ahead, Edie. You have to unmute, and just another minute we'll take before we have to close down.
Or just a comment and a question. Yeah, I mean, your description of Rabbi Carlebach and his impression on the whole Jewish community of all ages is very powerful. And when I was at Hillel during the 70s, and he traveled all over. I mean, several times he was at Case Western Reserve, but, you know, unhappily, do you know that he died on an airplane in one of his flights? But what I wanted to ask, what came to mind when you introduced this topic, and I wondered if you're going to address it. I mean, this is a very powerful session and very informative from a Torah perspective and the rabbis. But I think of people like the Sackler family and Michael Milken and all these powerful, immensely wealthy people who donated buildings and very big philanthropists. And the beneficiaries are still struggling with what to do with the names on the building.
Right.
Is this something you're gonna?
Yeah, it does come up later in the course, although it's a short course. But yeah, it's these are questions that a lot of institutions have to deal with, which is, can you separate the philanthropy, right? From, like, can you accept money, right? Sackler family and the opioid epidemic that they're partially responsible for, right? You know, and how do people view them as Jews? Yeah. So I know our time is running short, so or over. So I want to be respectful of everybody, but I do want to share that Diane will be joining us next week for session 2. I will be sharing the the text with Diane in advance, and of course you'll get you'll get your usual note. But next week is where will flattery get you? So it's all about obsequiousness, and where does that lead, and how much do we praise powerful people, and should we praise powerful people? So any event should be great. Diane, I'm so excited. Thank you for taking over. I'll be away next week.
Next week is July 4th.
And next week is July 5th on Wednesday.
Wednesday is July 5th.
Yep. So hopefully if you can make it, we love to see you. And I've recorded this session because a couple of people asked me to do so. I'll make sure to send it to them. Thanks, everybody. Have a great
good
week. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. See you next week.